What's up, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas here, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast for a very special edition of the show. We're counting down the days until the NFL draft. I'm very pumped up, very excited. And with looking at this upcoming NFL draft and how the Buffalo Bills will find that difference maker at the 30th overall selection, it got me thinking. Who are the best 5 draft picks in Buffalo Bills history? Now, this was a very tough top 5 to put together, but I believe due to the historical significance that these players they're placed upon this franchise, that these 5 draft picks are the best 5 draft picks that the Bills have ever made. Now, you could go a little bit deeper. You could go into a top 10. You could go into a top 15. You go into a top 20, and you would find yourself solid draft picks based on value of where those players were picked. But essentially, these are the best 5, not only the best 5 players, in my opinion, in Bills history, but based on the value that they brought in the round in which they were picked and based on what historical significance they brought to the franchise. These are the 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. Folks, I want to remind you to subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And feel free to leave a review on all of the platforms, whether it's mostly Apple Podcasts. That is a really review-based platform. If you leave me all the stars that you can, fill up those stars, leave me a nice description of why you like the show and what has you tuning in each and every week. I would greatly appreciate that. I've been able to meet a lot of great people since I started this podcast. Tons of great Bills fans, of course. Since I started this podcast, I was able to, know who they are and learn what makes them a Bills fan, and learn, why they love the Bills. What is it that makes them love the Bills? Whether it's, their grandfather being a Bills fan, or their father being a Bills fan, bringing them into the fan base, like mine did. That's the stuff that I love to hear. So feel free to comment, what makes you a Bills fan, and what has you excited for this upcoming 2021 NFL season. We're coming off of an extremely exciting 2020 season. That was what really had us, just motivated to get up each and every day during this COVID-19 pandemic football season. I'm missing it terribly. This is something that, I'm really itching for this draft to get started, so that, I have something to look forward to beyond, the end of football season. Ever since the Super Bowl ended, I've been looking at that calendar, counting down the days to the start of this upcoming season, and every Bills fan should be excited. We got some exciting times ahead, to say the least. And we have, a group of players on this team now that we've been waiting a long time for this team to get back to the relevancy that it deserves, that the fans deserve, that the community deserves. So I'm excited to see, how this pans out. But getting as many Bills Mafia members on here as possible, as well as AFC East people on here too. I love to hear some AFC East trash talk as well. So I greatly appreciate Jeff Davis, Ray Andrew, Larry Schumacher, Louis Asinato, Bradley Woods. I'm seeing all the names pop up on here as far as people that are tuning in. I really appreciate it. So let's get right to it. Here it is, the top 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. We're going to go 5-1, to quote the Doors, 5-1. So number 5 is none other than Andre Reed. And honestly, in this top 5, I could put Andre Reed at number 1, and I could make a case that Andre Reed is the greatest draft pick in Buffalo Bills history. He was picked in the 4th round way back in 1985. And, Kutztown, Pennsylvania. That's all I got to say. Kutztown, Pennsylvania, Pro Football Hall of Famer, came from a small town in Pennsylvania, proceeded to have 951 career receptions, 13,000 career receiving yards, 87 career touchdowns. He's the most prolific receiver in Buffalo Bills history. And, to me, Andre Reed ushered in a new era of wide receivers that we see to this day. We see guys go over the middle, taking the hits, but more importantly, the yards after catch ability that Andre Reed had, the ability to make, the first initial guy miss, then the next guy, then the next guy. He was able to rack up those yards after catch, and I'm sure Jim Kelly was very thankful for that over the course of his career, as was Frank Reich during his time here in Buffalo, as were any of the quarterbacks that threw passes to Andre Reed over the course of his long career with the Buffalo Bills. I can't say enough about Andre Reed and what he was able to bring to the table for 4 straight AFC championship teams. You look at years in particular that he essentially put the offense on his back as a receiver. One of the best receivers to ever put on a pair of wide receiver gloves, in my opinion. I look back at how things ended with Andre Reed at the time as a kid growing up in Western New York, to see that Bruce Smith, Thurman Thomas, and Andre Reed were all cut in the same day. That was a dark day for the Buffalo Bills franchise, and it was a day that I'll never forget. I remember waking up that morning, flipping through the channels and seeing on the old Empire Sports Network. I don't know if you guys remember that, but I know I do. Howard Simon was on Empire Sports Network, and he let the world, the Bills fan base, know that Andre Reed, Thurman Thomas, and Bruce Smith were all cut in the same day. That was a really weird way to end his tenure here with the Buffalo Bills. He went on to play for Washington, for a little bit, and then rode off into the sunset. And his wait to get into the Hall of Fame was one of the more egregious waits that I've ever seen for any player to get into the Hall of Fame. He waited a long time. He wasn't a first ballot, second ballot, third ballot. He waited probably, 6, 7 years, 9 years to get in, something crazy like that. And I just can't say enough about Andre Reed. His ability to go over the middle, catch passes, break tackles, his ability to run those deep routes as well. He could always find the ball in the air, track the ball really, really well. And those are things that I see now in this draft process I'm keeping my eye on in some of these rookies. But Andre Reed, he never seemed to deviate or change as a wide receiver. He only seemed to grow and actually get better kind of as his tenure with Buffalo went along under Jim Kelly. They were just like peanut butter and jelly. 12 plus 83 always equals 6. Andre Reed, number 5. Number 4, man that lives in infamy for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately. I know we'll have Bills fans, hop on here, and there's a consensus amount of Bills fans that do not want O.J. Simpson to be mentioned in any way, shape, or form. Then there's another side of the fan base that says, hey, let's separate O.J. Simpson's personal life from O.J. Simpson, the football player. Let's give, the personal life stuff obviously is not good, to say the least. But as a pro football player, he arguably is the greatest Buffalo Bill of all time. And, to put him in this top 5 greatest draft picks of all time, you knew how talented he was coming out of USC, number 1 overall pick. Ralph Wilson, paid him a pretty penny at the time to come here and play here for us. We built a new stadium at the time. The stadium that we still play in 1973 was built in large part due to the success that O.J. Simpson, the notoriety that O.J. Simpson brought to the Buffalo Bills. So, it's really tough for me to not put O.J. Simpson in this lofty altitude as one of the 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. He rattled off 2,000 yards in a single season, and that single season was 14 games. Nobody will ever break that record, not in today's NFL, to say the least. No running back will ever rush for 2,000 yards in 14 games. It just won't happen. It's impossible. I think that's one of the most unbreakable records that there is today in professional football, and I definitely understand why Bills fans, feel like, he shouldn't be mentioned. But Orenthal James Simpson, as a Buffalo Bill, was one of the best, if not the best, Buffalo Bill of all time. During his 9 years in Buffalo, he ran for 10,000 yards, 61 touchdowns, 2,000 receiving yards, 200 catches, and an additional 14 touchdowns receiving. The Bills had zero passing attack during that time. It was basically feed OJ the ball behind the electric company offensive line with Joe DeLamalure, paving the way for OJ to run through some holes. But man, I mean, OJ Simpson, he's got to be on this list as one of the best 5 draft picks in Buffalo Bills history, and I'm putting him here at number 4. Number 3, my favorite Buffalo Bill of all time. He's right behind me here. As I go backwards, he's right behind me here. None other than Thurman Thomas. Not only am I a fan of Thurman because we share the same last name, and when I buy his jersey, I don't have to, it kind of has a double-ended meaning to it. But I love running backs. There's no question. Running back is one of my favorite positions to watch. I love seeing the different nuances and styles that running backs have kind of shown over the eras of football. And Thurman Thomas, do you want to talk about a player that paved the way for running backs and how they play the game today? Thurman Thomas was the first, in my opinion, the first dual threat running back, a guy that could run in between the tackles and a guy that could run routes in very redeeming fashion, I guess you could say. Thurman Thomas was instant to me, one of the best running backs to play the game. Definitely one of the best running backs of his era. And you say, who's the better running back, OJ or Thurman? That's a debate for another time. But to me, Thurman Thomas, 4 straight AFC championship, teams that he played on, was really the guy that was carrying the workload in that Super Bowl 25 with the New York Giants. Was arguably the MVP of that game, despite the losing effort, ultimately losing that one 20-19 to the Giants. And, I look at Thurman Thomas and say, would Marshall Faulk have the career that he had if it wasn't for Thurman Thomas? Would Curtis Martin have the career that he had if it wasn't for Thurman Thomas? Would some of these guys now, Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, and some of these guys that can catch passes out of the backfield, would they have the careers that they have had if it wasn't for Thurman Thomas? There are players in this game that paved the way for the players of today, and Thurman Thomas definitely did that. So Thurman Thomas, to me, stands tall as one of the 3 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. Number 2 is Bruce Smith. Oftentimes when Bruce is back at, Highmark Stadium, I guess we'll call it. I'm going to call it the Ralph. When Bruce is back at the Ralph, you hear Bruce, and people think that they're, casuals, think that, he's being booed, but it's Bruce. And I just love that. I love that. I love the fact that Bruce Smith is still a fixture of this team and of this community. And Andre, Thurman, Bruce, they're all fixtures of the community still to this day. And, I look at who are some of the greatest defensive players to ever play this game. Reggie White, Bruce Smith. I look at, some of the more recent examples of linebackers along the way. Ray Lewis definitely stapled his name in one of the greater conversations. Lawrence Taylor. But Bruce Smith, to me, I've watched a lot of tape on Bruce Smith. We'll never see another defensive end like that again. And part of that is because of the fact that football is made to be a safer game today than it was obviously back in his day. Bruce would maul the quarterbacks, whether it was Boomer Esiason, John Elway, Dan Marino. They all knew about number 78. They all knew where he was at all times, and they still couldn't stop him. So that showed to me that, there's only a select few guys that what they bring to the table athletically, but they're one of one. They're that special. They have that many moves in their repertoire that make them a unique player. And Bruce Smith, to me, 200 sacks, all-time sacks leader, the greatest defensive end in pro football history, in my opinion. And, the infamous moment that stands out to me is the Super Bowl 25 moment where Jeff Hostetler's dropping back. He's got his hand on the ball, and Bruce Smith has his hand on Hostetler's wrist. And if Hostetler dropped that ball and a Buffalo Bill fell on it, that's a 5-point swing right there that ended up being a safety in that game that would have been the play to change the outcome of that Super Bowl for the Bills in hindsight. So Bruce Smith, to me, number 2 on this list. It's a very tough top 5, folks. This was a really tough top 5 to put together. I'm going to do the top 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history, and the top 5 worst draft picks in Buffalo Bills history as well today. So stay tuned for that. But as we count down here, the number 1 player in this top 5, it's probably on everyone's mind. It's probably an easy pick, but for me, this was a tough top 5 to put together, but I couldn't rate anyone number 1 but the man, the myth, the legend, number 12, Jim Kelly. And to me, without Jim Kelly coming to Buffalo, ultimately he decided that he was going to play in the USFL for a few years. You still have Buffalonians a little bit salty towards Jim in regards to that, wishing that he had come here in '83 when Buffalo had picked him. But without Jim Kelly, you don't go to 4 straight Super Bowls. Dare I say it, without Jim Kelly, you might not go to a Super Bowl. And people can say whatever they want that, he lost 4 Super Bowls and, he didn't play that well in the Super Bowls. Jim Kelly should be held in high regard for what he battled to get back to those 4 straight Super Bowls, those 4 straight years, to go and lose, to go and lose, to go and lose, to go and lose, and be the leader of that team and do that. To me, that says that he's one of the greatest, not just one of the top 5 greatest Bills draft picks, but one of the greatest Bills leaders, one of the greatest leaders in the history of football to bring your team back. And you want to talk about quarterbacks and what makes them impressive or more impressive than, quarterback A, quarterback B, I guess you could say. Jim Kelly called his own plays, ran the offense, ushered in that era where the quarterbacks kind of had the power to do whatever they wanted to do with their running backs, with their wide receivers, with their protection schemes, offensive line. Shout out to a guy that I think should be in the Hall of Fame. That's Kent Hull, all-pro center. He should be, the late great Kent Hull should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm all for that. But Jim Kelly, to me, is the best draft pick in Buffalo Bills history. He's picked in a class that stands the test of time. There have been great quarterbacks since 1983, but there is no quarterback class in one draft like that 83 quarterback class with Elway, Marino, and Kelly. You also had Ken O'Brien. You had Todd Blackledge, rounding it out, I guess you could say. But 3 Hall of Famers in one draft at the quarterback position, that's unheard of. I don't think we'll ever see it again. We might not ever see it again. And Jim Kelly was a part of that. Jim Kelly played in more Super Bowls than Dan Marino, 4-1. Jim Kelly was one of the most prolific quarterbacks of his era. So you have guys that grew up in that era, the Tom Brady's, the Peyton Mannings. They would rattle off who their influences were, and Jim Kelly was one of them. So to me, Jim Kelly kind of revived the Buffalo Bills from being this team in despair, fan base in despair, to being what they became at that time. And that's the bar. The quarterback is the money position in the game, of course, but the spotlight is on the quarterback, more on the quarterback than maybe any other position in sports. And that's the bar for Josh Allen, Jim Kelly. And, whether he meets it or not, I think he can. I think he will in his own right. But still, there's only one Jim Kelly. And to me, he's the greatest draft pick in Buffalo Bills history. We got a comment on here that I want to shout out. Jeff Davis. He said the top 5 were game changers. Yeah, I couldn't say it better. Short but sweet statement. I love the Gabe Davis profile picture. And those of you that are listening to this on audio, this is streaming live on Facebook and YouTube on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. So throwing out another comment here. Good list. Maybe J.A. will move into the top 5 soon. Go Bills. Lunchtime over. Catch up later. That's awesome. That's awesome. The fact that you're tuning into the show on your lunch break, I really appreciate that. Good list. I appreciate the compliments. I think 10, 15 years time, Josh Allen can creep into this list. I just don't know if there's another, even in the next 10 to 15 years, could anyone surpass those guys? It's very tough. Very tough. Josh Allen, if anyone can do it, Josh Allen's one of those guys that can. So thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Those are the top 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. As I said, I will be on here momentarily to put together my top 5 worst draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. Those are the top 5 best. Andre Reed, number 5. O.J. Simpson, number 4. Thurman Thomas, number 3. Bruce Smith, number 2. And Jim Kelly, number 1. Now, if we were to put together the best value picks in Buffalo Bills history, you would have guys like Frank Reich on the list. You would have guys like Darryl Talley on the list. You would have guys like Phil Hansen on the list. So, there are a lot of guys on this list that could be, if you were to extend the list or add a different verbiage to the list, there's been a lot of great picks in Buffalo Bills history. There's been a lot of bad ones too. And I'm going to dive into the top 5 worst on the next episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Stay safe. And last, certainly not least, go Bills.